Hi, I'm Michael Weatherly.
Hi, I'm Cote DePablo.
And this is Off Duty. We didn't do that, right? Okay, ready? You start this time.
Okay, hi, I'm Cote.
And I'm Michael.
And this is Off Duty.
See, it was as simple as that.
Welcome to Off Duty, an NCIS rewatch podcast. This week on the show, we're talking Season 3, Episode 23, Hiatus Part 1. Aboard a Turkish flagged ship, an explosion occurs, killing one person and leaving Gibbs comatose with burns, abrasions, and a concussion. The team investigates. Eventually, Ducky welcomes Gibbs back, but Gibbs does not remember him.
Today, Cody, we are discussing Season 3, Episode 23, Hiatus, Part 1, written by Donald P. Bellisario, directed by Dennis Smith.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a Smith-Bellisario special. And if you think that Season 3 was jam-packed full of fun, I think this episode has the whole season inside it. I mean, it's intense, this episode.
It's intense, but it's also, you know what I like about this episode? It's that there's a lot of like really serious stuff. I mean, and everyone's trying to like keep it together for obvious reasons. You know, Gibbs is in a coma and Jenny Shepard is like showing her true colors as far as what her feelings may or may not be. She looks great in
her ball gown or whatever that thing is.
Oh my God. And she walks with that crazy red ball gown and, you know, that crazy pixie hair, and it's so good. And then she's got that ridiculous, infamous Polly Perrette monologue.
For Gibbs to be brought to a hospital in an ambulance cannot be good. I had to come see for myself in my hearse. Got a flat, as usual. So, I got in a cab to go to the airport.
Gabby shoots walking into the hospital and then holding on to that woman's hand going, "You're a good person."
And then birth the farting hippo. Never, you know, we swing wildly.
What do you think? Women don't fart? I love that line. What do you think? Women don't fart? It's so good.
I mean, and Don also just lets things happen. I have an ad lib in this one, which I'm sure you spotted in MTAC, which we'll talk about later.
I know what happened.
Look, she slapped me and I was just slapping her.
If there's going to be any bitch slapping on this team, I'll do it.
And I really said that out loud just to make Don Bellisario laugh. That's kind of what I do.
And they kept it.
And I just have to say, Season 3 started with a bang, right? I mean, Season 3 was your intro. Season 3 was Sasha Alexander.
Season 3 was Season of Change.
Yes, you had Sasha Alexander, Caitlin Todd, and her ghost memory, whatever you want to call it, sort of haunting everyone. And the rain that happened in those first episodes, the Kill Ari 1 and 2. And then all of a sudden, here we are at the end, Hiatus Part 1 and Part 2. And it's bookended this season with two-parters that have a lot of real moody stuff happening.
And rain. And then there's like a really beautiful shot, and I'm not sure if you caught it. We're all there right after the explosion, and there's just this little window, you know, a tiny round window. And I look up and I go...
And you say, "It's raining."
It's raining. And it's so cryptic because everything's falling apart and Gibbs is away. And I'm like, it's raining. And there's like this, like, it's so bizarre. But
God bless everybody. I just think it's a highly entertaining episode of television. And I'm so happy we're going to be discussing it with our guest today. But before we get to that, can we flash back? At the time of this episode's release on May 9th, 2006, a disgruntled bus driver goes on a rampage in Dublin, Ireland, smashing through stopped and oncoming vehicles as he drives through streets, across tram lines, and up the wrong side of a divided highway. That's bananas.
That's absolutely bananas. And Warner Brothers records and releases, surprise, the 11th solo album by Paul Simon. The annual E3 video game convention is held in Los Angeles. A grizzly polar bear hybrid is found on the Banks Island in Canada.
Okay, what do you think a grizzly polar bear hybrid looks like? I think it looks like a little grizzly polar bear. All right, here's the episode synopsis, okay? While talking to an undercover agent on a suspicious foreign ship, a bomb explodes, killing the agent and resulting in Gibbs being left badly wounded and comatose while under. Gibbs remembers his first wife and daughter as well as their deaths. Meanwhile, Tony assumes temporary command of the team as they search for PinPin Pula, who is believed to be a member of a terrorist group. We are going to talk PinPin Pula. We are going to get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's bring him right in here. Executive producer extraordinaire. I'm going to
You'll say his name in English, and I'll say it in Cody-ish.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Horowitz.
Ladies and gentlemen, Marcos Horowitz.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there he is, my friend.
And he's designed his shot very well.
I brought a friend just in case.
Oh, my God. Look at you. You look the same, by the way. What do you do?
You do, too.
What do you do? What do you take to look the same?
You're so kind.
Well, is it just the traveling that you've done since you've, entered a very well-deserved retirement stage of your life?
The retirement stage, of course, there's no stress.
Yes.
Here we have many, many things to discuss. But
all right.
But the parameters of the show, obviously, is we're looking back. And you are here to discuss Hiatus Part 1 with us. Written by John
fortunately,
Bellisario.
I got a little birdie mentioned it last night, so I did sort of watch it again. So
well,
I'm
sure
such
you
a good
remember
episode?
it.
You look back at these things. Now, at the time, of course, and we'll talk about some of the freight train out of control, lifestyle that everyone sort of led. But you look back at these shows 10, 20 years later, they're pretty damn good.
Oh, yeah.
And also they kind of come together magically.
So many layers and so much depth. And in the classic sense, you have this story about PinPin Pula or whatever the hell the guy's name is and the explosion.
PinPin Pula.
No one gives a damn about any of that stuff. That was the wonderful thing about NCIS is that it turned the whole procedural on its head, where it wasn't just really about figuring out the detective story. The detective story was just a means to an end. It was a means to get the characters involved with each other. That was the thing. That was the NCIS trick. And to watch the humans interact with each other. Here's a fascinating thing to try. Watch that episode. Just turn the volume off. And just look at the behavior and the expressions. Cody, what you can do without saying a word, with your body language, with your facial expressions. I would read these scripts sometimes and think, how are they going to act this? Like, how are they going to do this? There's nothing there. And you guys would find this way. And because the other part of it is you actually had real chemistry. There was real chemistry going on because you liked each other. And so that came across on the screen. And I think that has a lot to do with why people are so fond of both of you.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, Mark, and not to delve too deeply into any sort of conspiratorial waters, but you did JAG before the NCIS. And I think a show like JAG, as good as a show like an episode of JAG could be, it could never be recognized by the entertainment elite, the press, as even after 9/11, when they really did come around on the show a little bit. But
yes, they did.
But for some reason, like a CBS 1-hour drama is just like, well, let's stick that kid in right field. It's like the Entertainment Weekly or the press in general. They don't even know. They've never seen an episode. They just make a snap judgment that it's some right-wing jingoistic military show that's boring as watching, an IV drip in a hospital room with a 105-year-old staring at the infinity. It's like, that's what they think. Well, maybe that would be more interesting. But
that would be fascinating.
But you know what I'm saying? There's almost a contempt for Don Bellisario and his ilk of entertainment. But a show like MASH, which was a CBS show as well, albeit based on a Robert Altman movie, that did get in the 70s those accolades and did come out of a place. But at that time, Archie Bunker was on CBS. At that time, so you had, it was a different programming schema and everything. But by the time we got into the 90s and the aughts, if you were making a procedural drama about murder in the Navy and Marine Corps, you might as well have just been shooting a blank wall as far as critics were concerned. But I would say this in closing. This is my rant. Hiatus, part 1 and 2, Kill Ari, part 1 and part 2. They bookend season 3.
Yep.
And they are 4 fantastic episodes of television. And I challenge people to show me an episode of 24 or Grey's Anatomy or anything else that beats those
still
episodes.
holds up this many years later. It was a very entertaining show.
You know what I like about these shows, and it's funny because Mark, you brought this up. This really, of course, you're dealing with this attack and this explosion and all of that, but really what you have are these snippets of character moments, which are revealing character moments, which are, by the way, probably moments that are not happening in front of your peers. So they're private moments that allow the fans to just take a closer peek at who these people truly are. And they're sort of revealing themselves. And that's what Don really did so well. That's where his
Absolutely.
master storytelling really came in. And we've obviously, we all went through many years of NCIS, and we all went through, many people at the helm, and, but I have to say, I truly enjoyed that season for my own selfish reasons. It was my first, and I was like, oh, every show's like this.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking about you the other day. I thought, Cote de Pablo lands at the beginning of the 3rd season of NCIS. This is a rock and roll show in terms of how it was done, scripts coming in at the last second. I mean, it was a freight train hurling down the tracks, and the rest of the cast had already had 2 seasons. They were kind of hardened already you couldn't throw them anymore. And I'm just wondering, I just love to hear about what you felt coming into this and how you immediately ingratiated yourself into this group and connected with everybody so quickly. It was very anticipated. People were very excited about having you there. And I thought a very unexpected outcome. I never really thought a relationship between you and Tony was in the cards. That's not where I thought this was going to go. And it felt to me, one of the things that the writers were encouraged to do was to sort of forget about dogma and watch the actors and write to their strengths and watch what they were doing and see what was interesting and then start writing in those directions. And I thought that had a lot to do with your abilities as an ensemble group to connect in the way you did and to riff. And you guys were like, by the end of season 3, you were like the Beatles coming out of Hamburg after 10,000 hours of rock and roll. You were like finely tuned improvisational musician. It was so much fun to just go down the set. And, I've read the scene a dozen times, and I'm sitting there, and you guys are finding these little moments and digging deeper and going in and riffing off each other. And, it was the surprise of like, oh, that's what this scene is about. That would come out of those rehearsals. And hell, it might not even happen until the 3rd take of the coverage, for crying out loud. I mean, it could happen at any point in time.
You touched on something really important, and I want to use this question to wind back the clock for you, Mark, because the vanity piece, okay, so when you're doing television, like when you watch, I won't name any shows or anything, but like, let's say you're wearing a hat, and you have to wear that hat walking up to the door on the exterior shot. And then we put the camera on the inside of the set, which is maybe 2 days later, and because you're now at the stages shooting an interior, and you still have the hat on, but you have to remove your hat when you enter the room.
Right.
Well, there are some actors that won't allow you to put the hat all the way on their head because they don't want to hurt their hair, right? And what Mark Harmon said to us when we were doing the Jags, he was wearing his hat, and he took off his hat, and he had like a line on his head. Never mind his haircut, which is a whole separate podcast, which I'll be doing on Spotify next year. It's called Mark Harmon's Haircut. But Mark had this, thing, and some of his hair was pressed against his head. And I think it was Carla Dean or somebody walked over and, being a responsible and professional part of the crew was like, talking to Suze, the script supervisor, should we, fix his hair and should we do the thing where he takes the set? And Harmon just called it. He was like, this is how my hair looks. And you know that about that guy, but he set, and for me, what I learned was DiNozzo's vein. Weatherly can't be, right? So, and I think that we all had that. If Ziva looks beautiful, it's because Ziva made herself look beautiful for whatever reason she wanted to get dolled up. But Cody DePablo wasn't worrying about being like getting some sort of product endorsement line because at every crime scene she looked like she stepped out of a magazine. And I think that level of authenticity, and it's still a compressed time frame, kind of ridiculous premise for a show. And that leads me to the question for you. You were there for the inception. You were there when Don McGill, I believe, tell us the story of how NCIS started.
My recollection is that it was pitched to CBS as Law and Order in the Navy. That was and if you remember those spinoffs, that's sort of how those shows went. There was a crime, and NCIS would be the cops, and they'd come in and they'd deal with the crime for the first half of the show. And then a new set of young, happening JAG attorneys would then take over and prosecute the case. That was actually the original pitch. And that's kind of how those two episodes kind of worked. And then, Don he had his finger on the pulse of this stuff. You got to totally give him all the credit for this. He's just watching this and realized, I think, what he really had in this cast, and thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I want all of them. I want these people all the time. I don't want to be mixing it up. And created this whole new show. And there was a great deal of emphasis to make NCIS not look like JAG. To make it a very separate show visually. And
talk about that. Talk about, Billy Webb and Don's editing style, and talk a little bit about what that is.
Well, the Bourne Identity movies had come out. There were these fast cut, almost like rock video style shooting for drama, kind of interesting. Man on Fire, those are films were sort of coming out. And JAG was done almost like a 1940s movie. It was very classic shots and composition and big orchestra music and, kind of like an old 40s style film. And the idea was for NCIS to be different and for it to attract perhaps a younger viewer and just to have a different look and feel. So, you had something else to go watch. And so, part of the challenge was that these scripts came in at 72 pages long. A normal script would have been 10 pages shorter than that. 72-page scripts. And I can remember Don directing in Yankee White, and you guys would do a rehearsal, and he'd say, okay, that's very good. Now do it twice as fast. Because you still had he wanted all the material. He didn't want to have to cut anything if he didn't have to. He just wanted it. So he would have you guys talk as fast as you possibly could. And we would shoot with 3 cameras all the time. I don't think you guys half the time even knew, okay, this is the close-up camera and this is shooting wide and this one's carrying me back and forth. You just had to be on all the time. There was no, well, I'll wait till I get to my close-up to give it,
no. Don't do that. We would have to tell guest stars, we would have to tell guest actors coming in, they'd say, oh, wait, what's that camera doing? I'm like, well, that could be your coverage. So I would just play it for all the marbles. I had done 13 years. I'd been working as an actor when I landed on the show, and I'd done, 500 episodes of a soap and a whole lot of half-hour sitcoms. And, one of my first jobs was the Cosby Show, and so you learn that every set is a different environment, and even 2 military dramas. NCIS Hawaii is not NCIS New Orleans, is not NCIS LA, is not NCIS. And every show is its own alchemy. It's its own blend of things. But what I am so grateful for, and you have such a special knowledge of, is Don was ready to punk Jag and to punk himself. And, one of the things he said to me early on was, Cote, gee, what are you doing? You're like a department store mannequin. He's got his cigar and he's like, God, you're just boring the shit out of me. Jesus. So he's like, he took me for a walk and he said, where's the guy I hired? Where's the guy I had dinner with? That entertained me. You know how much television I've watched? I'm bored. Don't just tell me a story that I don't want it. I don't want that. And I think he was at a point in his life where he was like, surprise me, anybody, somebody, offer me something new. When a writer came in to pitch a story, he would look at them and say, I've heard that story 10,000 times. Tell me a story I haven't heard. And, when Julie, his daughter, would be in the editing room and they were cutting conventional cutting. And he was like, go over to that camera. It's like, oh no, Don, that's on the other side of the line. He goes, I know where the line is. Don't tell me where the axis is, right? But what he wanted us to fracture it and break it up. And I'm so glad I met him at that time because I needed to fracture and break up where I was coming from as an actor. I think maybe Harmon felt the same way about expectations of him. So I think part of that alchemy is everybody being ready for that moment of, you know what? Like, never mind the bollocks. It's like, we're going to put out a Sex Pistols album. Now, granted, it's on CBS at 8:00 on Tuesday, but it is going to be filled with more energy than you expect. It's going to be shot in a weird way. And people are going to do wildly inappropriate things all the time.
All the time. And hopefully unexpected things. That was the best part. When something would happen on the set that people weren't really expecting to happen. Oh, that was the best part of the day.
Talk about a guest actor being hired and a location being booked because you only had the first act to work with. And
so that was the norm. We had, we would be lucky if we had act 1 or act 2 on the first day or the day before filming, let alone the whole script. We never knew most of the time who the bad guy was. We wouldn't know that until about the 3rd or 4th day of shooting.
But that would probably make for casting really, really interesting because you weren't like looking for the bad guy. You were just looking for the guy that could play the part.
You just made my point. We had to overcast everyone because you'd get to act 4 finally about 4 or 5 days into filming of an 8-day show. And you get to the end, go, oh my God, the murderer is the secretary who had one line of dialogue in the first act. And now she's got a monologue this big. You had to make sure everybody was really strong because you just didn't know.
And sometimes somebody would be hired based on the strength of the first act. And so they're like, oh, I'm playing the SecNav, or, oh, I'm playing, whatever it is. I'm Condoleezza Rice or whatever. And then in act 2, then Don got bored with that character. So by act 2, the character is moved to the back of the room and has no lines. And then act 3 comes out and they're not even in it. And then in act 4, it turns out that they just have one line. And they're a serious actor. And they're like, what did I do? And it's like, it's not you. Well, maybe it's not you. But Don watches the dailies, right? And then he starts writing from the dailies. And I just have to say, I think that I feel so much gratitude that not only was Don ready to blow up the conventional procedural drama in the way that he wanted to, and nobody at CBS understood what the hell he was doing. The first poster, crime is their battlefield. Right. As if we were a bunch of earnest, criminal investigators. It's no, we're a clown car with guns. It's the craziest thing you ever saw. Well,
and you're speaking about it did not get the critical acclaim that other shows sort of got, but it certainly, the audience got it.
Yeah.
And you certainly had this incredibly dedicated audience group that just kept growing and growing. And it's not that I made a habit of reading a lot of fan mail, but I was always impressed with how far down the road they were way ahead of the writers in terms of where they thought things were going. That was always very, very interesting.
Was it surprising to you that the show became so popular? And
oh my God.
What do you think made it so popular? Do you think?
Oh, no, I thought we'll be at it, 3 years.
Well, I remember signing a contract and my manager at the time saying, this will not go more than 3 years. And I was like, 3 years? That's an eternity.
See, and really, this was also part of Don's thing. Listen, he held the bar very high. And he expected a very high standard, and he could be a bit of a taskmaster. But he had a very long-term view. And one of the things that he was constantly telling the writers was, don't give it all away in the first season. Like, spread out the little bits, all the little origin bits. Just tease them a little bit, including your relationship, which will just very slowly start to, now pull them.
I'm in MTAC, and I remember that Don was grumpy this day, and he was visiting set, and Dennis was scallywagging around and being hilarious Dennis. But also, when Don came on set, everyone, you batten down the hatches and everyone. But I knew that was the one thing Don didn't want me to do. As court jester, my job was to not bow down and not do that stuff. He wanted that little punkish element. So we're doing this MTAC scene, and I'm talking about, Galib and PinPin Pula and all this investigative thing. And they go, well, do you think this guy has a chance of, getting into C Fleet or whatever to investigate that? And I'm like, I got a better chance of going out with Jessica Alba than this guy does of getting into C Fleet.
Was that your line?
No,
I just made it. I made it up. I made it up to make Don laugh.
Right.
And I swear I could hear I'm reacting to him laughing off camera. And that was kind of my job at that point was, and I'm so grateful for it because it taught me a kind of superpower I didn't know I had, which was not giving a shit. And, when Mark Harmon slapped me on the back of the head for the first time, I could have turned around and go, hey,
don't do that anymore. Yeah, right.
But instead I said, thank you, boss, because I knew I deserved it. And, it's like we were and again, it's of a time. I think that the show has a certain kind of incorrectness in our current political climate. I think that even at the time, it was a little edgy. But we were in Santa Clarita and nobody could get to us. Now, that was another thing.
We were allowed to follow the impulse. We were allowed to play. The rules of the, sandbox rules were very different back then. And we were allowed to do things that today I think, even not very long ago, a couple of years ago, I was, I was taking a class and I had a friend that I was doing a scene with, and he said, very politely and not very respectfully, he said, I will now put my hand on you, and is it okay if I touch you here? And I looked at him and I was like, what are you doing? Like, just go, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, no, you need to follow the impulse, and he was like, no, I need to ask for permission, and I think back, of course, I'm older, and of course I came from a different education as far as, the improvisation of things and the, hey, let's allow ourselves to explore. And of course, many things have happened, throughout the years that have been a violation of those moments. But where we were working and how we were working at the time really enabled us to come up with a lot of what the things that certainly worked on the show that came out of either mistakes or kind of audacious impulses that were somehow received well by the other right. actors or characters, and we were playing, and it was embraced and it was allowed and it was okay.
But don't you think, Mark and Cote, that, like, for instance, the graphic nature of Autopsy and the way Ducky behaved around the cadavers?
They were having a little trouble with the help. Nothing for you to worry about. It's going to take more time than usual, but we're going to get you out of there. I promise.
That was not a norm. That wasn't normative. That wasn't the way Quincy did it back in the 70s. It was, there was always a kind of sense of the way to play death is with nonchalance and a kind of, offset it. And that's that impulse.
Well, and also that level of like respect, obviously, for,
for the dead. Yeah.
And yes. And the thing with McCallum is that he really created a character that was so his own. He would talk to these dead bodies, and then he would do things that were out there and that were at times even irreverent, and but it was all in. It was all so much part of that character, and that was also him. He was so in love with the craft too. Now looking back at it, and how much respect he had for it, and how much he loved his character and the research he would do. And I mean, it's so admirable. And now, so many years later, and certainly after his passing, you kind of go, wow, it was so cool to be in that company, and so cool to watch somebody that cared and had been in the business for so long. I mean, we worked with a legend,
Every one of you, and this is true with the current cast as well, but every one of you cared. Every one of you showed up to work in the morning, stepped up to the plate, and swung that bat as hard as you could every day. And that energy was infectious. And you could feel it. And the audience could feel it. And you
had to, though, Mark.
You had to. Yeah.
And
there's no other choice.
But you didn't have to because somebody was like there, like going like, get no. Or, you had none of that. And it's the thing that I always say to young people, especially now as I get older, like, oh, how did you get started? And I always say the same thing. Try to find a group of people that you admire and you look up to, because they'll keep you on your toes. So when you show up to a set and you see that everyone's like, okay, these guys are good, like you have to really try so hard. And if you're lucky, you bring something to the table that also sets, and so you keep bringing that bar higher and higher and higher. It's the reason why I think so many actors, want to work with the best of the best, because at that point, it's not like, you're just in their company. You have to step up to the plate. You have to get better. You will get better. Even if you're just watching. You're just watching. You're in the presence of greatness.
Do you remember the read-through, which was the backdoor pilot for NCIS Los Angeles? I hope you have a memory of that.
Yes, and we actually had Daniela.
We actually talked to Daniela.
We had Daniela was there, and Chris was there, and Todd, and they were all there. And I would say, and like I said, you were all battle hardened by that point in time. You were an amazing band that just rocked, and also I would say perhaps a tad competitive, and so everyone gathered around the table, and this didn't start until about the fourth season. I think these table reads at lunch, but they really became quite important. And this was for the first episode of the NCIS LA spinoff. And like I said, Ella was there and Chris was there. And normally in a table read, it's fairly casual. You're not really supposed to be acting so much. People are just kind of exploring the text and kind of finding stuff. But you guys, we could have shot it and put it on the air. It was, you guys just knew exactly what was going to happen. And I'm watching the expressions on LL and Chris's face as this is going on. And they're holding on to the table, just trying to sort of keep up. And I remember, and they were very humble about this, even at the end of it, they were like, holy cow, you guys are really good. Like they couldn't get over it. And that really speaks to, how tight you were as a group. I always feel the underlining theme of NCIS, its success, and the thing that I think the audience really responded to was that the story really was about the kids trying to please dad. That was the story. Like I said,
it still is, isn't it?
Well, exactly. The kids trying to please dad. Will Gibbs be proud of me if I achieve this goal, or will he be angry with me if I fail? And then what are my brothers and sisters going to think? When he admonishes me. And of course, everybody's been in that position before, so there's a certain amount of commiseration that goes on. And then that was what was going on in the stories in front of the camera. But I would say, especially in the first 3 seasons, that same dynamic was going on behind the camera. And Dad, in that case, was Don Bellisario. Everyone, not just the actors, but all the producers and the writers, everyone wanted to please, Don.
Do you remember the casting process of the pilot of NCIS and whose names you heard first, and what was that story like?
I don't know. I just remember coming down the set at the beginning of that third season and seeing all of you. There was some scene where you were all together in one place, and I thought, oh my God, it really is a television show. Like this, look at everyone has their place. Everyone is clearly defined. How many shows do you watch now where one and two are kind of standouts, and then everybody else you can barely remember who the hell they are and what the hell they do? And that was not the case in our show. Everybody, Paulie Perrette, everybody brought something. Sean Murray, my God.
When you talk about a show's success and that alchemical mixture, I think it is relatability and identifiability. Like you said, there's a father and everyone sees that family dynamic, but even the interpersonal, like the sibling dynamics, and sometimes it even feels like a workplace comedy. Like we could be working at Allstate selling insurance with guns,
Yeah.
We're insurance investigators. We have to go to some crime scene.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
And we're like, well, it looks like arson to me. I don't know. Let's get the duck man in here and figure it out. But there was I think that if you worked in an insurance firm or you worked at a rental car agency and you had cubicles like the cubicles we had, it didn't feel like some futuristic, super fancy, no one's ever seen a set like this before. It was like, oh yeah, it's the big orange room. It's like, this is a place that is where people who are perfunctory do their widget work. And that means if I work that way, I can watch this show and it's relatable and identifiable, but it's also, who are these people? I wish I worked with these people.
That's right.
And when I went down with Rick to Pendleton to the NCIS offices, Harmon and I went down for the Ice Queen meltdown for the Jags. And Rick Warmack was the NCIS advisor before Leon Carroll for the original pilot. And Warmack took me down there in his car, and I'd never really rode with a federal agent before like that. And we went in there and we met all the agents, and I was there for hours and we heard stories. And there was this one guy whose jeans were a little too tight and his shirt was unbuttoned one button too many. And he really liked his hair. He kind of kept doing this with his hair. And he had,
you were like, that's me. You were like,
and he had lots of stories. And I was over by his desk. And then he was talking about how he was going to go skydiving that weekend. And he just bought a new GTO and then he walked away. And I turned to look at the woman who was sitting at the desk, which I remember being on a slightly higher level. And I turned and I said, he's a piece of work. And she goes, he doesn't mean any of it. He's just, he's harmless, but oh my God. And I was like, oh my God. That's
but you were
so
like,
good.
he's a really good agent.
Yeah, he's really good agent.
But like people tolerated his vanity. They tolerated his John Travolta tight pants and his kind of over eager sensibility because he doesn't mean it.
And this was brought up constantly. You were also really good agents. Yeah. So you could have these quirky, personalities and these interactions with each other that seemed perhaps a little too familiar for the workplace, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, you're the guys that got the call to go in and get the bad guys. And you were really good at it.
That's why I think it became kind of like a family show. It was G-rated. It had a lot of funny bits. A lot of people could say like, oh, Dad, I want to be like that. Or, hey, Dad, you remind me of that. There was that kind of like family element where you had these kind of cartoonish at times characters, but everyone had this persona that they could identify or certainly parts of a persona that they could identify or maybe want to be more like.
And entertaining as hell. You know what I mean? Just very entertaining to watch. Great energy.
Very.
It just reminded me that there are people that probably joined NCIS because they were inspired 20 years ago, and now they're retiring.
That's right. Oh, my God. I mean, the longevity. Can you just think about the impact? I mean, how many times did you run in to talk to agents In the beginning, I have to say, they were very good with us. They gave us a lot of support in the very beginning, and then really just kind of sat back. And obviously, you know, I went to the NCIS place in D.C. years ago, and they have a wall of photographs of fallen NCIS agents. And so I asked the gentleman, I said, well, how did this gentleman pass away? He said, oh, car accident. Oh, how about this person over here? Car accident. They'd never actually shot a gun. They'd never actually killed anyone. But
Right.
they weren't going to put the kibosh on any of that on our show. They really allowed, you know, that because they were getting so much attention internationally. You know, they're very, very good at staying connected with their international partners all over the world. And because the show ended up having this huge international appeal, they became famous. I mean, to go from the early episodes where you used to have to explain to the TSA guy, no, not CSI, NCI, you know, to now everyone remembering NCIS.
Can't escape the noise we share. Neon glow brings souls tonight, slipping through the cracks of light. Plastic dreams, cold steel, fight human flaws in glitchy sight. Haunt me through the wires. Voices rise, electric choirs. Lost in dreams or digital fights. Haunting neon liars.
The name of this game is Producer's Dilemma. And we're going to set out some scenarios for you here. And as the pro producer that you are, we're going to ask you, what would you do? Not what would Gibbs do, which we know is also a thing. Okay, your number one on the call sheet has gastroenterological problems and is flatulating constantly, incessantly on set. And co-stars and guest stars are complaining. It's consistent. Even the sound department has now come to you and said some of it has to get looped because your number one is farting on his lines. What do you do?
Farting is nothing. That is nothing. Are you kidding? Farting?
Okay, all right, here we go.
We've had people in comas that we had to roll out and shoot. Just keep shooting. Keep shooting. We'll loop it later. Don't worry about it.
Okay, Rachel Good has come up with a new ridiculous team uniform for your main cast to freshen up the show's look after so many seasons on the air. But it's a disaster, and you don't want to hurt her feelings. What do you do?
Rachel, we have a new series that is in the works, and this is going to be perfect for that. We're going to save it.
We're going to save it.
For an episode that's coming up where we have a whole different team show up, we're going to put them all in that. It'll be fantastic.
By the way, not just because Rachel Good is one of my dearest friends, but I don't think she could ever come up with a bad outfit.
She's
That's true.
extremely talented.
I know.
Yes.
We're going to have
One of the best.
Oh my God. As quite frankly, all of the department heads on that show.
Yeah,
That was part of the pleasure.
Okay.
It's almost an impossible situation, but we'd like to know what you would have done.
Here
we go.
Event that would have
A
happened.
prominent guest star is a very prominent, well-known actress guest star, has signed on to play a very big part in the show. Lots of negotiations. It took a lot of study. You're paying her more than you've ever paid any guest star, but it was all contingent that she know how to ride a motorcycle. When she arrives on set, she does not know how to ride a motorcycle.
These are not so far-fetched, my friend. These are not, I don't have to sort of imagine too much what these are.
So Jamie Lee Curtis can't ride a motorcycle, but she said she could. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't Jamie.
That was not Jamie Lee. Jamie Lee's, she's a player.
She could ride a motorcycle.
We would, out of an abundance of caution and safety, obviously someone who doesn't know to ride a motorcycle can't be put on one to do much. So unfortunately, she'd have a helmet. So we would have her we would push her into shot for, when she arrives and take off the helmet. And then we would hire a stunt person to do the rest of it.
That's professional show business, everybody out there on the interwebs. Okay, here's your last one. So far, you're 4 for 4. Let's see if you can go 5 for 5. And your prize is a monogrammed hand towel from the off-duty closet. You show up to your location to find that it's a real live active crime scene. Your big-time celebrity guest star is a method actor and has already convinced the police on the scene to let you shoot on the scene of the actual crime. He's threatening to walk if you don't let him. The police seem to be willing to make it happen. What do?
Well, if the police are going to play along, I'm not going to argue with them. I'd say, let's go.
Let's
as long
that
as
evidence.
you give me my shot.
Just shoot. That's all. We don't want to. We never want to stop. That's you can't stop the train. You have
Okay.
to
I love it.
somehow finesse it. It's sort of like flowing water. It's like a river. You can't stop the river, but you can kind of, you can make it curve this way and that way. That's what you got to do. Shoot. When you came back for your special episode,
You mean
in
season 2019?
19, yeah.
Hello, Gibbs? No time for pleasantries. You're in danger.
And we were all waiting for you, and we were very good at keeping secrets. These surprises that happened in front of the audience were a surprise to many, many people who worked on the show that were not told about what we were going to do. There was a whole thing we did where that scene was never published. It only existed on one piece of paper. And we would literally show it to the dozen people that had to be involved. And that was it. It was never released to agents or anyone. The dailies were all kept separate. Everything was separate. This happened when Kate was shot on the rooftop. That's where it started. And we came up with what I called Fight Club rules. We're invoking Fight Club rules. We're just not going to talk about it. And I mean, you're not going to talk to your wife, your husband, your kids, your friends at the bar. Nobody. And we were able to sort of pull this off. And your return was one of those where we sent the whole crew off except for a very small group of people.
Skeleton crew.
You got caught up in traffic or something. There was some kind of accident or something. So we were waiting. It was late. It was the last night of the last day of the season. And I forbid anyone to take any pictures, but I was there with my camera. And there's this moment where suddenly a hush came over the stage, and echoing from the distance are footsteps, very distinct boots.
Clomp, clomp, clomp.
Coming closer and closer and closer. And everyone turned and looked and waited. And then from around this corner comes Cote de Pablo. It was a wonderful, wonderful moment.
It was a really crazy moment for me too, because I remember thinking I'm not sure how I'm going to feel, And I thought, well, it's going to be what it's going to be. But I remember am I going to be able to step on stage, and am I going to be able to say these lines? I haven't done this in so long. And it was all just kind of there, and it was kind of magical. I remember seeing you. You were really, I have to say, Horowitz, you've always been just such a sweet, present, understanding, artistic, sensitive, total consummate pro. I mean, I have no idea how you did it half the time, because it always seemed to me like you were just kind of greeting people with this very warm smile. You never came across as, anyone who was just angry or the typical sort of quintessential producer that's always running around being loud. And you always had this really kind of great energy about, the world could be falling, and I knew that I could look at you, and you would do this to me, and I loved you for it. You would come close to me, and you would blink your eyes, and you would go ding, 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 and then you would look at me, and then you would go, dear heart. You remember? You would always call me dear heart, and I always knew that some really horrible things could be going on, certainly personally, and I could just find you from wherever, and you would just kind of give me that little Horowitz love, blinking of the eyes, and then, hi, dear heart. And I was like, okay, I'll be okay. You're just so sweet. Thank you so much.
Just think about this. this many years later, here you are back together. People still care enough to tune in and listen to this. And looking forward, are we talking about this?
Yes, of course. We've been talking about it now.
To more. And you guys are going to bring it. And you're going to make so many people so happy. It's going to be fantastic.
You know, we've been talking about it for a long time. Michael and I, we always said, oh God, if we could tell the story in our, you know, in our way, or certainly have the great privilege of maybe having some input, you know, in storylines, or, you know, wouldn't that be fun? You know, so we get a chance to do it. As you know, nothing's a guarantee, and we're just excited to be able to do it, you know, and have this adventure somewhere in Europe and explore these characters from an emotional place and see what they're doing and how they're going to tackle all of it.
I think it's going to be great, and people are they're really going to enjoy it. You're going to have a great time. Good for you.
I am so glad that we got to do this. I feel like this should be a two-parter.
Oh.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface of like
You've made this
psychology.
very easy for me. Thank you, Shannon.
Mark, thank you, dear heart.
Oh, you're very good.
Doing, 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 doing.
This was particularly fun, I have to say.
But every one of these things is different.
They all have their own little special sauce, don't they?
They're like puppies. You just like, you get a new one. You're like, I think this one's my favorite. Then you pick up another one. You're like, but this one. I mean, like, when do you get bored of puppies? Doesn't happen. I feel like we had some real insight. And I know that we have been trying so hard to orchestrate a conversation with Mr. Bellisario, because having Don would just be so great. And,
But isn't it remarkable how much we've actually talked about Don without talking to Don? Like, we talked a lot about Don today with Mark, you know, and so I feel like no matter what, we've talked about his work, we've talked about, you know, we've celebrated his work, and I certainly feel like I've said, you know, how thankful I am to have, you know, had a taste of that you know, that world, the Don world.
Yeah. It's been really extraordinary. I'm very, very happy that we got to talk to Mark Horowitz today.
Yeah.
Now, we've got some fan questions. Harriet from Kentucky. I love how Tony looks after the team with Gibbs in the hospital, and he does an amazing job being leader. Why, thank you, Harriet from Kentucky. Who do you think would be the worst temporary leader out of the crew? I think it was Donoso.
No, actually, I think you. No, I think. You know what I think? You know who I think would not, like, she would just be so, like, all heart the whole time. It would be Abby Shuta.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it would just be like,
and
if you don't want to,
really
you don't have to
play
do
well
it.
with
Like,
others.
Oh.
She doesn't really want anyone else in her space, and she has a lot of fear. Like, there's some phobias.
Yeah, I think there would be like an avoidance of a lot of the important things that need to be tackled.
I think Ziva would be great, but you've got a lone wolf streak that might make you a little tricky. I don't know how much of a team player she is. Hey, Jules from North Dakota said, who came up with the name PinPin Pula?
Oh, God, Jules,
that is
you know
one for the books. I bet you it was Don.
That is one question we've been asking for, I think, 20 years.
It's got to be Don Bellisario.
Don Bellisario, for sure. PinPin.
PinPin Pula. I mean,
PinPin.
I had a picture of PinPin Pula next to my desk for years after that episode aired. Do you remember it?
Well,
it was the actual actor playing it, but it didn't say PinPin Pula. It was just a picture of the actor who played PinPin Pula. And I had a little pinup of PinPin in my squad room on the wall. It's probably in the background of some shots.
The name would just be thrown in the middle of a scene, I think years to come. And it would just be like a laughing moment.
PinPin Pula.
PinPin Pula.
No, it's right up there with some of the best. All right. We're going to Sam in Utah. Director Shepard calling Condoleezza Rice to get into the trauma ward of a random hospital was pretty funny. Who on your contact list would you guys call if you needed to impress somebody?
Oh,
or
so that means that, like, you need to name drop. I have no one.
I would call Cody DePablo. And
by the way, you did.
But no, we're not telling that story for legal reasons.
Okay.
We're not telling that story.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, you did.
But I have in the past, we can just say, generally speaking, I have in the past.
And I was like, what are you doing, Weatherly? Anyway, I love you for doing so. And by the way, I picked up the phone because I was like, oh, that's my friend Weatherly. I haven't heard from him forever. And I did. And I was just amazed at the reason. Anyhow.
You know, when they say call a friend on like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and they're like, call a friend. You're my call a friend. That's if I were on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and they were
but hey. This episode really goes into something that you and I have talked about before. Actually, it's more like a life thing, and I'm not sure if we have time to go into this. But this episode really goes into trauma. And the character of Gibbs goes, he's in a coma, and the doctors keep saying, we feel that he doesn't want to wake up because he's revisiting some sort of trauma. So this is a personal question. You may opt out. It may be edited, whatever. Have you ever felt like you didn't want to wake up from something because you hit a trigger, or you revisited a trauma, or you went to a place that was dark and you felt like, oh, okay, I need time to process this?
What do you mean wake up?
Now, I don't mean, by the way, that you're like in a coma or that you want to do something to yourself or you just don't want to wake up. I just mean, have you gone through revisiting trauma?
I have, since my brother passed away, I have been able to look at aspects of growing up from a kind of different angle. It's almost like somebody moved the camera and I'm kind of seeing memories differently. And that's really interesting. I'm starting to understand my anecdotal nature, the defense mechanism where I turn everything into a funny story because it makes me uncomfortable, is also something my mind does with painful, traumatic stuff from the past. So my interior defense mechanism turns it into funny for me, or an anecdote, or a thing I learned from, or, as opposed to being comfortable in the discomfort of that memory and letting me see it from a more honest place.
I very recently went through a little bit of, I would wake up in the middle of the night and and it wasn't revisiting trauma. It was completely the opposite. So recently I had a death in the family, and that was my grandfather, and he passed at 98. And I didn't get a chance to be there. But I did go there a couple of months before, and I said my goodbyes. And at one point I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would start thinking about my grandparents. And I realized how lucky I was, because I had those two incredible human beings and they loved me so much. And I thought to myself, I don't think they'll ever know how much I loved them, and I don't think they'll ever know how important they were for me, and how much they shaped me in my life, especially as a young child. And then I thought, no, there is a way they know. And so I started having this dialogue with them, waking up in the middle of the night for months. And then I would just say, oh my God, I love you so much. And oh my God, thank you so much. And oh my God, how privileged was I to have that kind of unconditional love and that guidance and that like eternal support and, all of that. So it wasn't quite trauma. I was dealing with this nostalgia of missing them so utterly and completely. And they had gone. And there was a part of me, I think what I'm trying to say is I've been talking to the child in me that still needs a couple of things. And I find out that they were such a big part of my life. And the child was they were such a big light in that child's life. And today, sometimes when I'm looking for that light and I can't find it, and especially as I get older, I go, oh my God, how much would I give to just be in their company now, because they were just so special. But the greatest part that has come through this kind of awareness of revisiting beautiful memories, and having the awareness that they're no longer here, is the fact that there's also this really kind of beautiful thing about connecting with the idea of, okay, well, they're physically not here, but they're completely here. And I could still make peace with that. And I could still say thank you. And I could still say how much I love them. And I could still say, like, wow, wasn't that such a beautiful thing to to have felt that, to have had that in this lifetime, and to have been so lucky.
A lot of gratitude there, Miss DePablo. When we talk about Gibbs trauma in this episode, Hiatus, right? And as that moves forward into Hiatus Part 2 and everything, Gibbs is a keeper of secrets.
But aren't we all?
We are, but I think that part of what you're talking about is, it's good to tell the people that you love them. Let them know.
Oh, yeah, I think it's so important.
And
even if, and
nothing
even
to
if
be
it's
ashamed
like
of.
No. In fact, you just don't know how long you'll be here. And as you get older, that becomes like an ever-present reality.
So Gibbs' rule of the day is rule number 4. The best way to keep a secret, keep it to yourself. The second best, tell one other person. There is no third best. I don't really think Gibbs shares a lot of those secrets, though.
Let me ask you something. Do you have secrets?
Yes.
And do you share them with anyone? Have you ever shared them with one person, or are there some secrets that you haven't even shared with someone, like with a special someone, or do you have at least one person that you've shared secrets with, or do you still take some with you that you don't share?
Yes, I have one person that I do talk to in absolute, and not a professional, not a therapist person, but like a friend. I'm a very open book, but there are a couple of things that I probably,
Weatherly, for as open as you are, you have secrets.
I've got secrets. Now, don't forget that you can watch all of these with us on Paramount Plus, and that you can catch new episodes of NCIS on CBS. And you can probably just sit down and start channel surfing and you'll find it pretty much anywhere in the world. Or you can go bring out the DVDs. I don't care how you watch it.
Just watch it.
Just watch it. It's fun. Especially this season. What a great season of television.
It's a super fun season.
Next week on Off Duty, as Gibbs struggles to cope with the effects of awakening from his coma, which has left him with amnesia, Tony and the rest of the NCIS team attempt to find the terrorist PinPin Pula, which, incidentally, was Cody's original stage name back in New York. Anyway, the team races... Anyway, the team races to stop a potentially devastating attack from occurring, and this is it, folks. The grand finale of Season 3, Episode 24, Hiatus Part 2. Oof. Foof.